Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are joining us today. My name is Nicole Weber, and I'm the WASH Technical Director for ProWASH and Scale, which is a USAID Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance funded Global Capacity Strengthening Learning and Research Award. I'm pleased to invite you to today's meeting. This is the second of BHA's Emergency WASH Partners meeting. Before we go ahead and get started today, I would encourage you to select interpretation. We are offering English, French, and Spanish. And so you can look at the bottom of your screen, click interpretation, and select the language that you would like to hear, English, French, or Spanish. We have close to 100 participants on the line today, so I think we will go ahead and get started with our meeting. Next slide. So today's objectives are really to engage and interact with BHA's WASH advisors and to share best practices and questions with other peers across the globe. Many of you were part of the first partners meeting, which was held last September. And during that meeting, you had an opportunity to discuss BHA's some of the priorities when it comes to WASH. And so today we will continue that conversation, taking a closer look at climate change and WASH, which was a topic that you voted on at the last meeting. Next slide. So today we'll have welcoming words from BHA. Then we will move on to today's topic, which is on climate change and WASH. This will be followed by a questions and answers session. We'll then have quite a bit of time to dig deeper into the topic in regional breakout rooms. Finally, we'll wrap up today's 90-minute meeting by voting on the next meeting's topic. Next slide. So before we turn it over to BHA for opening remarks, I'd really like to thank everyone for participating in the pre-event survey. We asked for your input to help us plan for this session, and that input was shared with BHA. We received close to 50 responses from a range of organizations, and the results went into planning the presentations and the breakout rooms. We also thank many of you who volunteered during the survey to share your organization's experiences. We hope you do so in the regional breakout rooms so that we can learn from each other, particularly when thinking around localization and regional differences. So as you can see from the map, there was a wide range of responses, and we had a lot of questions that came in for BHA around approaches, infrastructure, data evidence and monitoring and evaluation, water resource management, water safety plans, partnerships, the definition, scope, and mandate and funding of climate change and WASH interventions, and then greening the response. So I will now turn it over to Melissa, BHA WASH team lead, for opening remarks.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. And on behalf of the WASH team, we're very happy to have you participating today. I'm Melissa Oprisco. I'm the WASH team lead here at BHA. I'm especially appreciative of the wide range of partners and regions represented on the call today. And I send a tremendous thanks to ProWASH Scale for helping facilitate today and organize the whole event. We're very pleased to have joining us today our BHA colleagues in the Water Resources Management and Natural Hazards Disaster Risk Reduction teams. You'll be hearing more from them as we move through the presentation. And if we could go, let's see, yes, so you can see our contact information there on the slide. You're welcome to contact us at any time, and we monitor those emails. So happy to hear from you. As many of you know, we've arranged these partner meetings to have a better direct communication with our BHA WASH partners. And we welcome your participation today and are eager to hear your experiences and input on climate adapted WASH. The results of the survey provided after our initial partners meeting last September that Nicole mentioned indicated a clear interest in discussing climate adapted WASH, which is what has resulted in today's topic. And I have to admit that this proposed quite a challenge to the WASH team because this is an area that is very much under development, We don't have absolutes around it, but we have a lot of learning and we have a lot of great background information already that you'll be hearing from our colleague Suzine. So this provides a wonderful opportunity to hear from your experiences and lessons learned in this area. We look forward to the discussions in the breakout rooms and appreciate that you're joining us in this. We anticipate that most of the questions that were submitted through the survey will be addressed during the following presentation, but we welcome additional questions. Please, while we're in the plenary, use the Q&A found at the bottom of your screen to pose any questions. We'll attempt to get to as many of these as possible during the presentation, and then we have a 10-minute after the presentation to address some of the questions. There'll also be time during the regional breakout rooms. If we don't get a chance to answer your question today, please be assured we will be responding during follow-up that'll be sent out to all the participants. I'm now very pleased to introduce Dr. Suzine Tokar. Suzine has been a long-time colleague, first in OFTA and now BHA, and has been a leading voice for USAID on all things climate related. She's a dear colleague and a respected expert in the field. Suzine is the lead senior hydrometeorological hazards and disaster risk reduction advisor at USAID BHA. She provides technical expertise and guidance on how to mitigate and respond to climate, weather, and water-induced disasters, including floods, droughts, cyclones, tsunamis, extreme temperatures, and climate variability and change. Suzine oversees BHA's programs on hydrometeorological early warning systems, including droughts, floods, cyclones, heat waves, and other hazards. She's also the BHA technical lead for the Early Warning for All initiative and for disaster risk reduction, or DRR. She provides technical and policy advice to BHA on climate adaptation efforts in humanitarian settings and has represented the US government in a wide variety of global platforms and high-level working groups. Suzine holds a PhD in civil engineering with an emphasis on hydrology and water resources engineering. Dr. Suzine Tokar will provide an overview of BHA and the agency's efforts in climate and climate-adapted WASH. And now I'm very honored to turn it over to Suzine. Thanks, Suzine.
Thank you so much for such a kind words, Melissa. Good morning, bonjour, buenos dias. It's a great pleasure to be part of this meeting to discuss climate with you all today. In a few minutes, in the next few minutes, I will quickly review terminology, a few climate observations, impacts, projections as it relates to water wash, a brief presentation on US government, USAID, BHA activities and frameworks in climate, and we'll quickly discuss climate water wash activities. Next slide, please. Thank you. I want to quickly go over some terminology so we can, when I use these terms, it's clear that it's clear that you know what I'm talking about. We adopted most of these terminologies from the international framework, so we all talk on the same, terminology when we communicate with each other. So disaster risk reductions, as you know, is from the Sendai framework, is preventing new and reducing existing disaster risk and managing residual risk, all of which contribute to strengthening resilience and therefore to achievement of sustainable development. Climate change refers to any change in climate over time, whether due to natural variability or as a result of human activity. Climate mitigation is a human intervention to reduce emissions or enhance the sinks of greenhouse gases. Climate adaptation refers to the process of adjusting to the actual or expected climate change and its impacts in order to moderate harm or exploit beneficial opportunities. In the context of USAID strategy, adaptation interventions seek to strengthen resilience to the unavoidable impacts of climate change. I also would like to mention, I get this question a lot, what is DRR versus what is climate change adaptation? I want to give a brief way how we think about those two terms or approaches. Disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation have similar aims and mutual benefits, so they're closely linked. Both focus on reducing people's exposure and vulnerability to weather and climate hazards by improving people's ability to anticipate, cope with, and recover from impact, thus reducing the disaster risk and increasing resilience. However, DRR also cover non-climatic disasters such as geo, techno, and bio. And adaptation covers long-term impact beyond the hazard that affects communities over time. So we can go to the next slide. I want to share two figures from the IPCC Assessment Report 6 that are relevant to our discussion today, and I hope this will provide you some motivation to talk more about the climate and how we implement climate approaches in emergency WASH. There are a specific section on the water, as you know, in IR6 for your spare time reading, and there's very useful maps and figures that will help us understand what is waiting us in the future. So in this figure illustrate regional synthesis of changes in water and consequent impacts on ecosystem and human system. Looking at water quality globally, which I believe this is your major interest, we see that we have low confidence on the observation of water quality and does not show any increase or decrease. Although climate-induced water quality degradation due to increases in water and surface temperatures or melting of the cryospheres has been observed, evidence of global scale changes in water quality is limited because many studies are isolated and have limited regional coverage. As you see, there's major gaps in Africa, South and Central Americas. When we look at the projections to 2050, that indicates a decrease in water quality globally, although the confidence level is low. Climate change is projected to increase water pollution incidences, salinization, eutrophication due to the increasing drought and flood events, sea level rise, and water temperature rise, respectively, in local water system, rivers, lakes, etc. But there's a lack of exact quantification at the global scale. When we examine the impacts of changes of water, we see negative or adverse impacts on wet sand through most of the region. Again, there's some data gaps. Overall, both observed and projected changes indicate negative impacts, even though confidence is low. This is not good news. Climate change is expected to compromise WASH services, compounding existing vulnerabilities and increasing water-related health risk. So if we can go to the next slide, please. I wanted to show some hotspots in this map. Figure illustrates local levels of policy changes for addressing water scarcity by 2050. We know we're going to have issues, but what we're going to do is going to be very important, how we deal with these challenges. Substantial uncertainties in projected water scarcity are crucial factors causing water management policies and planning challenges in the future. Therefore, locations projected on the map to see significant increases in water scarcity with large uncertainty can be considered to be subject to the highest challenges for water management policy in the future. It's probably not surprising to you to see regions that are already facing challenges today is projected to have the highest challenges in the future. We're looking at Middle East, Eastern Africa, Northern Africa, Southern Africa, South Central Asia, part of South America. Let's go. So this is the doomsday scenario. So what are we doing, especially in the US government? Let's go to next slide. I will go through multiple slides to give you a framework that enables BHA to support climate risk reduction programs. Our work in climate adaptation guided by higher levels from White House, USAID, and then BHA. Let's go to the next slide. In COP26, the US government launched the President's Emergency Plan for Adaptation and Resilience, or shortly PREPARE. PREPARE aims to help more than 500 million people in developing countries to adapt to and manage the impacts of climate change by 2030. PREPARE activates the whole government efforts that brings all the US federal agencies to accelerate adaptation action to support countries and communities that are vulnerable to impacts of climate change. The action plan defines strategic objectives that support 3 interlinked and mutually reinforcing pillars. The first one, knowledge; second, plans and programs; and third, resources. The water is weaved through the 3 pillars, but more pronounced in pillar 2. There's a specific section on this. I recommend you to read PREPARE action plan that's in the webpage of White House. So it basically focuses on supporting a water secure world where people have sustainable supplies of water of sufficient quality and quantity to meet human health, economic, and ecosystem needs while managing risk posed by climate change. So you can read that more in depth in the President's PREPARE action plan. Let's go look at next slide, and we can talk a little bit about USAID climate strategy. Next, please. The strategy guides USAID's efforts, all bureaus and operating units, through 2030 to advance equitable and ambitious actions to confront the climate crisis. So how are we gonna do that? Let's look at the next slide to see that. This goal will be achieved through 2 strategic objectives. First is what can we do now to facilitate targeted direct action, and what we will gonna do to reduce the impacts in the future that brings us to drive systems change. We are also showing our commitment to addressing the climate crisis by transforming the way the agency operates. We have a special objective specifically focusing on transforming our own operations to substantially reduce carbon emissions, adapt to climate crisis, and further climate justice within USAID and partner organizations. I'm not going to go through those intermediate results, which is marked as an IR, but I want to indicate for your spare time reading what IR or intermediate results include specifically WASH activities. And those are both in development and humanitarian context. So those, I know some of you also work with the development partners, so that might be helpful to you to see how we're approaching this whole climate crisis. IR 1.2, building resilience. IR 2.1, increasing the, 2. Transforming key system services and associated sectors. IR 1.3, increase the flow of equitable access to finance. And IR 2.4, which we find ourselves, especially in BHA emergency WASH, is the overlapping impact of conflict and climate change. That's mainly HDP nexus, humanitarian development, and peace nexus with the background of climate change. So let's go to the next slide. So we're coming from the US government, USAID, which is our mothership, and then BHA. We can go to the next slide and we can talk a little bit about our priorities and work. BHA's climate work is largely implemented through our long-standing disaster risk reduction activities, integration in our response activities, and investment in strengthening local capacity and resilience programming to address the increased climate risk. Our priorities and action aligns with USAID climate strategy and prepare, of course, to help to reach that goal. Our work, of course, our main goal is to catalyze humanitarian assistance through locally led and equitable climate action. This centers strong community engagement and involvement to address climate-related disasters. Let's see. Then, of course, we don't work only within the US government, but we also align with and contribute to several key guiding international frameworks. As you know, all our DRR activities align with Sendai framework for Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction. And recently, we are also aligning some of our climate work with UN Secretary General Early Warning for All initiative. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm going to go through very quickly our climate priority areas. 4 priority areas highlights where our current and future efforts will be and are implemented. So I'm not going to go through this. As you know, the frontline communities is our focus, and we are focusing to reduce climate risk in there. And second category, our risk reduction and resilience programs will build the knowledge base to address climate across the HDP nexus. Third, we will build decades of experience in climate early warning system to enable early action at all levels. And last, we will coordinate our both human development and humanitarian partners to advance climate resilience to lower greenhouse gas emissions throughout the humanitarian supply chain. Let's go to the next one. Of course, we have, next slide, please. Climate action across cross-cutting issues. This also involves collaboration, learning, inclusion, equity, and justice, localization, and using our community and advocacy to advance these goals. Next slide, please. So I'm going to give a few examples of what we're doing. You probably heard about our Climate Smart and Disaster Ready APS annual program statement. We're working through the award process right now, and some of the awards have WASH sector intervention in those awards. We also work on early warning for all, as I mentioned. We work with regional and country engagement. We're trying to continue deepening our engagement with regional stakeholders, mission, regional partners, and others, and greening our supply chain. Next slide, please. We cannot do this alone without your partnership, as well as multilateral partnerships, strong donor coordination, and advocacy, which the slides show different partnerships that we have to achieve our goal. As you know, there is no significant trend of increase in humanitarian funding, so we have to figure out how to leverage our collective efforts to reach this goal. So thank you for your partnerships. Let's go to next slide. So I'm going to talk a little bit in this slide, integrating climate BHA water wash programs with climate. Next slide, please. So I want to say that we need to make every effort to integrate climate adaptation into our programming, if possible. However, this should be done based on relevant risk of climate in proportion to other public health risks in target population. So we always recommend assessing climate risk at the target communities, as well as availability of water resources, both surface and groundwater. We also recommend considering all water uses in your design, sharing climate risk and risk reduction strategies with water user communities, and please use forecast and early warning of climate hazards for early and anticipatory action where available. I also want to emphasize that please ensure that your design take into account not only how much water we are demanding, but also how much water is available. So this is extremely important, especially if we are trying to adapt communities to climate change. And if feasible, we also recommend to design or enhance water wash infrastructure to mitigate climate risk, strengthen cluster coordination around climate, because we all work, wherever we work, there's climate risks. Build capacity around water conservation and strengthen planning of water development and use at watershed level. All right, let's go to the next slide. Our WASH colleagues, we work in this decision flow chart for you to see how to include climate adaptation in your emergency WASH. So hopefully this will help you in your programming to integrate climate adaptation. Where climate impacts are significant and common, which is reoccurring, climate adaptation approaches should always be incorporated in the program as it's shown in this flow chart. We only not prioritize climate adaptation where climate risks are not significant or additional cost for integration is not acceptable. So those are the two key messages you might want to keep while you're implementing the programs. We don't have specific threshold, what is proportional additional cost, but our teams will work with you on this when you're programming. So simple activities, if you can do, for example, where floods are recurrent, which we see that especially in protracted crisis, raised latrines in IDP sites can be a good example of climate adaptation. Next slide, I'm going to go give some example for how to integrate, very simple example on integration of climate adaptation for specific hazards. This is not a comprehensive list. We collected common approaches, and I'm sure today's discussion, you're going to tell us way more creative and innovative solutions to that as well. I'm not going to go through the whole list. For example, drought monitoring groundwater trends will be a great activity for understanding the resources and supply part of the water. Utilizing forecasts and early warnings for early action will be a great, a very cost-effective way to prepare for the hazards, especially forecast give us sometimes a month ahead lead time, so we have time to do that. For flood-related conditions, raise protected wellheads, repairing, cleaning canals and drainage system. Again, using forecasts to early warning and early action will be great. Sorry, I keep focusing in early warning and early action because this is my day job and I'm really, that's my favorite topic to talk. So you hearing me talking about a lot of early warning and early action. Heat-related issues, and we are seeing this an emerging hazard in many, many places last 5-10 years. I think, you have to plan for higher water demands, and messages for behavior change will be really helpful. But let's go to last two slides very quickly. I want to really, please use the BHA emergency application guidelines climate keyword in your application if you're using climate adaptation outline in the keyword. This is extremely important for us to track our investment in climate adaptation, and this helps us to make decisions on planning and programming of our resources. I provided those conditions where areas discount towards climate adaptation And the next slide, I also provided indicators. So I want to thank you for in advance using this climate keyword. I think that concludes my presentation. Next slide, and we can probably turn the mic to Melissa or others to proceed with the meeting. Thank you again for making time to hear me today.
Suzanne, thanks again so much. That was a very wide-ranging overview that you managed to pull together some really critical information in a short amount of time. And so, yes, I saw the comment about will we be able to share the slides? We will indeed, because I think there is a lot of rich information in there that I'm sure people will want to refer back to. And so at this point, we do have a little bit of time. We have about 10 minutes for Q&A. We don't have any questions that are in the Q&A box at this point, but I'm happy to refer to some questions that came up in the survey. And they were a lot of broad questions, but while I have both Suzanne and our water resource management advisors with us, we can take advantage of having them here. So some of the questions, and this is a really interesting one, is how do we incorporate integrated water resource management principles into BHA during emergencies? I think that's a key question, and one that we have within BHA ourselves. We have a lot of conversations around that. I'll perhaps ask the presenter to go back a few slides. I think the slide 28, and looking at some of those interventions that are listed there. This also came about from a lot of conversation across the teams and continues to take shape. I think these are some of the pieces that we would very much like to talk about further within the breakout rooms to really understand your programming, where these have been working, what other pieces have come in. But while I have our WRM colleagues, perhaps I can ask Cole Van Abel if she is on. I'm looking through the long list.
Yes, I'm here.
Great, Nicole. So I'd love to introduce Nicole. She is a water resource management advisor and works quite a bit on the resilience food security activities. So while we're in plenary, if you wouldn't mind just saying a little bit, Nicole, about the work that you do and some of the longer term programming that we have and how that links in.
Yeah, great. So yes, I'm Nicole Van Abel. I'm a water resources management advisor here in BHA. And some of the things that we like to think about now is with this water resources management and some of the climate change issues happening around drought and stuff like that, is trying to think more strategically around protecting and conserving water resources. And as Suzanne said, that can be doing things like monitoring groundwater trends, planning and assessing, thinking about the multiple uses of water. We can think about using nature-based solutions to tackle some of the challenges that we have surrounding natural resources management, water resources management. But we know that in emergencies, we never want to compromise any of the life-saving stuff. But sometimes if you're experiencing a multi-year drought, we may need to think more strategically and think over multiple years. With our resilience food security activities, that's much easier. We have 5-year programs that are funded for 5 years. In emergencies, it can be a little tougher, but we're here to help you and support you with thinking about that. We've had some good examples of programs that have done that. So like we've seen World Food Program do that in Niger, where they've been able to build demi-lunes and really change the landscape. It was funded in 1-year cycles, but over many, many years. So yeah, with water resources management, we just encourage a little bit of a mind shift, not sacrificing anything, but starting to think more strategically and focusing a little bit more on the soft side of things, which are harder, governance, assessment, planning. But they're really great ways to start thinking about that and working to protect your water resources before it's too late. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Nicole. That was great. I also see that Diego has added a question. There are key experience, and I believe this is, are there key experiences or documents on anticipatory action in the framework of the conflict? Suzine, can I turn that over to you?
Sure. I mean, as Nicole said, you know, for sudden onset disasters and, you know, when there is a great need, it's one different scenario than when we have in the protracted crisis with multiple years of drought. So as I mentioned, using forecasts and early warnings is extremely important in planning your water. Anticipatory action is part of that, you know, actions, approaches. BHA is currently released, I believe, or as we're about to release, a anticipatory action document pretty soon, if it's not released already. I know we were trying to release that. So I think if that's out, we will share that with you. But I mean, the crux of anticipatory action, understand where we are and understand where we'll be in coming weeks, months. And so the basis of that is early warning and how we use early warning to take action. I think in the, of course, when we get to the HTP nexus, anticipatory action will be more important, especially in situations we find ourselves in the protracted crisis. So the planning will be very critical, and understanding what is waiting us in the future through the early warning system will be very critical. I don't know if I answered your question, but you know, please see our one pager on that. And there are other resources. IFRC is coming up, have a lot of resources on anticipatory action hub, which is managed by German Red Cross, also have a lot of guidance on this.
Thank you, Suzine. And we can add links to those when we send out information after this session. I'm also seeing Baptiste has a good question. I feel humanitarian actors are poorly equipped in terms of forecasting capabilities. Is there any specific useful guidance on this topic that could be shared? Suzine, yeah, I'm going to turn back to you.
Yes. You know, every country that we work with, whether they are in the conflict or not, have what we call national meteorological and hydrological services. And they are authorized to provide warning for hazards or threatening their citizens. And some has capacity, some doesn't. But every Met service have the information you need. They issue at least basic, you know, weather forecast. They issue seasonal forecast. In addition to that, for example, in Africa, Eastern Africa, we have EGAT, Climate Prediction and Application Center. Those are regional centers, especially for drought-related issues. They do issue seasonal outlook that gives you a month or almost 3 months advance what the weather will be. So it is important to use that information, which is widely available to everyone. So I think understanding what is waiting us is especially important in managing our resources. So that's what I recommend. I will send a link to you, which WMO lists all the national meteorological and hydrological services around the world, so you can gather that information. And then regional centers, some of the regional center in places we operate.
Great. Thank you, Suzine. I'm going to turn to Albert with this. This is going to need to be the last question we do in this part, but we will, any questions that are out there, and I see some coming through the chat that we won't be able to respond to immediately right now, but this is a big question and we're going to have to keep the response short, so can talk more about it in the regional rooms. But the major effect of climate change is a reduction in freshwater sources, but BHA does not support direct mitigation, but adaptation. How can it be adaptive to no water, which is absolutely ideal? So there are a bunch of things in that question, and we'll try to tease out a little bit with just a little time. Albert, do you want to start to address that?
Well, I wondered if, let me see, I'm looking up the question here. If whoever put the question in could come off mic to elaborate a bit on that. I wasn't sure how to interpret all of it. It was Camilla.
Yeah, I'm not sure you can come off mute, but could add more to the Q&A right now.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's see. Okay, I'm not seeing more. If you want to try to talk a little bit about mitigation versus adaptation.
Do you want me to
Or-
kind of handle this a little
Sure.
bit? I'm assuming the mitigation is an interesting terminology because we used to use this in disaster risk reduction, and we completely moved to disaster risk reduction and abandoned mitigation. And I'm assuming Kumela is referring to climate mitigation, right? Because it's used by the adaptation. The mitigation efforts, it's more of a development side. Climate mitigation, reducing greenhouse gas emission, is the more of a mandate in the development side. Internally, as I mentioned in the USAID strategy, our biggest contribution to greenhouse gas emissions is our humanitarian supply chains and relief commodities, and we're trying to do a lot to reduce that. So that's our biggest consumption or contribution to the greenhouse gas emissions. In the programming side, our programs are, we, as Nicole mentioned, we are doing nature-based solutions in lieu of many other activities, which contribute to mitigation, climate mitigation efforts, although it's really not substantial. So adaptation is aligned with our mandate. So that's why we are focusing on reducing vulnerability and exposure and increasing capacity to climate-related risk, so we can enable communities for the adaptation. So I don't know if I address at least part of that question.
Thanks, Sazine. I'm going to turn it back over to Nicole now to shift us in where we will have the breakout rooms and be able to have more direct conversation and people can come off mute. So Nicole, over to you.
Yeah, great. Thanks so much. And thanks for a really interesting presentation and discussion. As Melissa mentioned, we are now going to have time to go into breakout rooms. And so based on feedback from the last partners meeting, we're going to have about 25 minutes in breakout rooms to really allow you time to exchange with each other and with the BHA WASH and Water Resource Management advisors. The rooms will be facilitated by the BHA advisors, and then we have ProWash and Scale note takers in each of the rooms. We will share a Google document where you can provide written input, or you can come off of mute and speak while you are in those rooms. Please note that some of the breakout rooms are larger, such as East and Southern Africa. So we do ask you to be concise when you speak to allow many of the partners to share when you are in those rooms. So in those rooms, you will discuss some of the challenges and successes you've seen in climate resilient WASH, which approaches are appropriate and impactful in emergency WASH. And you, depending on the breakout room, might also touch on watershed and aquifer resilience and sustainability. The BHA teams have customized the breakout rooms to be in line with the type of questions you provided during the pre-event survey. And so each of the rooms will be tailored to those questions and approaches that you had mentioned ahead of this event. So next slide. So in order to join your breakout room, we have 5 different breakout rooms, and you'll have to manually select to join a room. Please note that if you are in the West and Central Africa breakout room, you will need to stay in the main room because we will continue to offer the French interpretation. You will need to select 1 to go to the global breakout room, 2 for Asia, Middle East, and Europe, 3 for East and Southern Africa, and 4 for Latin America and the Caribbean. The Spanish interpreter will follow you to the breakout room 4 for Latin America and Caribbean, should there be a need for interpretation in that room. So please go ahead and select your breakout room now. 1 to stay in the main, stay in the main room for West and Central Africa, breakout room 1 for global, 2 for Asia, Middle East, and Europe, 3 for East and Southern Africa, and 4 for Latin America and Caribbean. And you will have about 25 minutes to speak with your peers and the BHA advisors in those rooms. Thank you. Okay, thanks so much. We just caught the tail end of the West and Central Africa breakout room. It sounds like you were also having a really interesting and insightful conversation. As you join back to the main room, please make sure to select your interpretation channel. So you should be either on English, French, or Spanish, depending on your preference. So if you're coming back, please go ahead and select that. So I was in the global room and we had a really interesting conversation. I want to note that we will be sharing out a synthesis from the breakout rooms in an email along with some of the USAID resources. So we won't do a readout now, but in the coming weeks, you will get an email that has a synthesis of what was talked about in your breakout room as well as other ones. As noted, the ProWash and Scale note takers were also compiling questions and comments. And so we'll be sure to make sure that all of that is also shared with BHA for further action. So as we start to wind down today's event, we do want to share with you some of the key resources that have been mentioned throughout today's presentations. Cezanne mentioned the climate strategy. There's also the climate links, which is USAID's knowledge portal for climate. Many of you, I'm sure, are very familiar with the USAID Water and Development series, which is a really helpful series of technical briefs on water, on WASH and water resource management. And there's a specific one around climate resilient, low emissions, water security and sanitation, which I would encourage you to take a look at if you haven't yet had a chance. We'll also be sending links to these resources in that follow-up email. It looks like I also see that someone has mentioned that you can continue to add comments directly to the documents. So yes, please do. If you didn't have a chance to finish your conversation in the breakout room, we're happy to keep those open through the end of this week before we start synthesizing that information. So please do drop in additional responses or ideas when it comes to those different questions. Next slide. So now we want to take some time to vote on the topic for the next meeting. So this next meeting will be held in about 6 months from now, so September, October. And we have a number of topics that you had originally expressed interest in speaking to your peers and to BHA about. And so now we've ticked off the list: climate, resilient, WASH, although there's still a lot that I'm sure you would like to discuss in the future, but we can vote on our next topic. So we have here identification, assessment, and monitoring of WASH needs in displaced settings, emergency drinking water quality or water quality monitoring, linking to other sectors, WASH and multi-sectoral interventions, sustainability and ownership, WASH staff capacity, training, expertise, and effective mechanisms to build capacity of WASH professionals working in emergencies, construction quality, WASH funding, accountability, user-centered design, and user satisfaction, localization, NFI kits, products, and sustainability of NFIs, behavior change and outbreaks, including to dispel disinformation or myths, fecal sludge management, and WASH and inclusion of persons and disabilities. So my colleague Suzanne will ask you to join us on AHA slides so that you can vote for the topic for the next meeting. We will ask you to vote and then what you would like to learn more about that topic. So you can scan this code to join, or you can click on the hyperlink that Suzanne just directed into the chat box. Great, I'm starting to see people join. Just another few seconds to let a few more people vote. Great. We can go ahead and take a look at the results, and you can keep voting as we look at this. So it looks like we have a couple of different topics that are raising to the top. Linking to other sectors is one of those. Another topic looks to be around WASH funding. And third looks to be around emergency drinking water quality monitoring. So we will spend some time discussing with BHA on what the next topic would be between these three that have really risen to the top: WASH funding, linking to other sectors, WASH and multi-sectoral interventions, and emergency drinking water quality. Let's go to the next question. So let's start with multi-sectoral interventions. What would you like to talk about at the next meeting when it comes to WASH within multi-sectoral interventions? And please, if you haven't been able to join us on AHA, but you'd like to share what about this topic you would like to discuss, you can drop that in the chat box and we'll be sure to add it to the results. Yeah, so I see here that people are responding to both the topic around linking to other sectors and WASH and multi-sectoral interventions, as well as around WASH funding. So I think we can move now to our next question, which is around what went well during today's event and what things you'd like us to change for next time. I'm sure also closer to the next meeting, we can follow up with you on these top two topics to get more information and insight from you on what you would like the meeting to focus on. I am seeing a lot around WASH and nutrition, WASH and ag, WASH governance, sustainability, WASH and environment. So it looks like there's a lot we can discuss. Let's move now to how we can improve for next time. Great, this is really helpful. I'm seeing that there was a lot of interest for the group discussion and the brainstorming and more time at the breakout rooms. So good to hear that those conversations were really fruitful. So you can continue to respond as we close out today's meeting. We love to have this feedback. We will certainly be meeting afterwards with BHA and see how ProWASH and Scale can better support the next partners meeting. So I really want to thank everyone for participating today and to our presenters. And I would like to turn it over to Melissa for closing remarks.
Thank you, Nicole, and want to say just a huge thanks to participating. This was a great turnout, really. We so like talking to partners and hearing more about what you're doing and how we can improve things on our side. Want to say thanks to Nicole and the team at ProWASH Scale for fabulous facilitation, and to the translators. Great to have you as part of this. It helps so much to open the doors of communication. We are still learning how best to create this dialogue. The WASH team has just wanted to figure out how we can have a more regular conversation, knowing that everybody's busy, don't want to take too much of your time, but want to somehow have an ongoing conversation. So it's challenging with the time. I loved all the comments that we'd like more time to chat. We love to chat, so we'll try to figure out how to fine tune this. Really important conversation. Can't say enough thanks to Sazine for joining us today. I think she really helped pull the conversation into our wider climate discussions. And really, as I said to others, we look forward to keeping this conversation going. For any who can join next month's Global WASH Cluster meeting and the Emergency Environmental Health Forum, either in person or online. Hope to see you there. And just thanks for all that you're doing. This was incredibly helpful and interesting. Take care.